but the core narrative remains stubbornly the same. This book is a history of that narrative, where it comes from, how it's evolved through successive generations, and why it remains so powerfully evocative. For many in America, the failed 1964 presidential campaign of Barry Goldwater was their first experience with conspiracy theories bleeding over from the fringes of culture into the mainstream. Goldwater's embrace of far-right anti-communist paranoia and his refusal to distance himself from his most paranoid supporters, instead of just laughing these people off, he told Steve Allen in May 1964, I recognize them as people who are concerned, people who recognize that some things in this government are not going the way they like. Shocked journalists and the intelligentsia. That someone with a real shot at the highest office in the land could make common cause with conspiracy theorists was a sobering wake-up call, and it led, most famously, to historian Richard Hofstadter casting a long view over the history of American democracy, trying to understand where its fringe conspiracists come from. Taking in its anti-Catholics, its anti-Illuminati, its anti-Masons, and grouping them together with the John Birch Society and other 1960s nativist campaigns, Hofstadter's late 1964 essay, The Paranoid Style in American Politics, argued that a certain kind of nativist paranoia is a fundamental component of American democracy. Hofstadter saw this element of America as a perpetual fringe movement. Every so often, as with Goldwater's presidential campaign, the paranoid nativists got perilously close to power, but that didn't change the fact that they existed primarily on the margins and were best constrained by a healthy, sensible middle ground. Hofstadter fretted that in a populistic culture like ours, which seems to lack a responsible elite with political and moral autonomy, democracy was open to being co-opted by the wildest currents of public sentiment for private purposes, where a highly organized, vocal, active, and well-financed minority could create a political climate in which the rational pursuit of our well-being and safety would become impossible. The solution, he argued, was a rational, civic-minded centrism that could moderate and restrain these dangerous excesses. The 2016 election seemed to many a confirmation of Hofstadter's warning of what happens without a sensible middle. A fringe candidate espousing obvious lies and conspiracy theories swept into power while the sensible moderators of American politics were asleep. Donald Trump's embrace of an endless string of conspiracy theories, that Barack Obama was not born in America, that the father of his Republican primary opponent, Ted Cruz, was involved in the assassination of John F. Kennedy, that Bill Clinton had a hand in the death of Deputy White House counsel Vince Foster, to name just a few he had espoused before taking office, would have seemed to utterly disqualify him as a serious candidate for the highest office in the land. In the wake of his election, many concluded that his win was a fluke, the result of a series of democratic safeguards breaking down that allowed for the American fringe to erupt into the mainstream, echoing Hofstadter's thesis of American democracy. It was a dispiriting event for many who believed in rational arguments and the truth. As political scientist Paul Musgrave wrote in the Washington Post in the days before Trump's inauguration, conspiracy thinking has been normalized in American politics in a way that almost nobody could have expected a year ago. Months into his tenure, those who'd long assumed that Trump's paranoia was anathema to the office of the presidency were horrified to discover that, in the words of columnist Maureen Dowd, the office has not changed Trump. Trump has changed the office. But Donald Trump was not the first American president to embrace conspiracy theories. Throughout 1774 and 1775, George Washington believed that England was controlled not by George III, but by a secret cabal of ministers fomenting dissent in the colonies. Abraham Lincoln argued that political developments in the 1860s were the work of a slaveocracy, a combine of wealthy enslavers who were perverting the will of the American people from behind closed doors. In 1971, Richard Nixon told his aide Bob Haldeman that Jews are all over the government, further arguing that they were by nature